today. Before I introduce our wonderful speaker today, I'm actually going to turn it over to Tamir. She has a little bit of housekeeping to take care of for students who are attending this.
So if you're a student who is attending for a class, you'll make sure you've signed up on that sheet before you leave. But also, at the end of the session, you'll get to fill out a raffle ticket for a Kindle Fire. At the end of all the One Book events this year, each One Book event, we've done the raffles and the tickets, and then we're going to pull one to win a Kindle Fire. So make sure you do that with me before you leave at the end of the talk. Correct. So let's not interrupt him from that.
Correct.
And don't forget, you have till Friday to get in your entries for the One Book Multimedia Contest. There's still time to go 24 hours without social media and make an entry if you do it today.
Correct. Yes, you kind of do have to start today. And the winner of that contest will receive a free 3-credit class. So a lovely prize. All right. So now I'll go ahead and I'll introduce our speaker, Waldo Jaquith. Thank you very much for coming. He is a technologist with a technology transformation service, a startup within the federal government that helps government at all levels build, buy, and share modern digital services. He spent the past 3 years as the director of U.S. Open Data, an organization that built the capacity of open data and supported government in that mission. He previously served as the senior technology advisor to the Sunlight Foundation and built the federal ethics transparency system at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He lives in Albemarle County with his wife, son, and a small menagerie of animals. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you for saying those very kind words I wrote about myself. Great. Well, I feel like I should be broadcasting this on Facebook Live just to really bring the whole thing full circle. Oh, circle. I told a joke accidentally. So I would just like to begin with a show of hands. Who liked the circle? Who did not like the circle? Wow, all right, overwhelmingly against me. All right. So here's what I want to tell you over the next few minutes here. Why transparency and effective governance are often at odds. Why tying people's real identities to their internet identities actually has no effect on discourse. People are just jackasses, as it turns out. And why Dave Eggers' vision of the near future is not something that we actually have to worry about. So I want to say at the outset that The Circle is a fun book. I enjoyed reading it. It is also unrelated to how technology, business, or government works in any way whatsoever. I'm relieved to tell you. I am a technologist who has spent years in business, politics, state and federal government, so I am unusually qualified to inform you of this fact. It's very rare that I get to be really well qualified for a thing, because like a Venn diagram of my skills overlaps on like one person. It's not often anybody's really interested in this, but here I am. I found my book, and I don't like it, which is sad. So how tech, business, and government actually work is really more interesting than I think The Circle portrays them, and I hope you'll agree. But I need to get something out of the way. I have a laundry list of things about this book that made me want to throw it across the room. Once I literally went to throw it across the room until I realized it would wake up my wife, and I decided not to. So I'm just going to run down them because otherwise I'm going to explode. Annie goes into a coma from stress. That is not a thing. Nobody has ever gone into a coma from stress. That's just. This is not even a little bit what it's like to work at Facebook, Google, or Twitter. I know a bunch of people who work at all three of these places. So it's not even like a parody of reality. It's just not connected to reality in its representation. Eggers bragged, I was reading interviews about this, he bragged that he did no research at all into what it's like to work at a social media company, and that is obvious. It's ripe for parody, by the way. Like, the reality is these are kind of funny places to work that do goofy things. He just didn't know about them, which is too bad. For the computer folks in the room, the Unified Operating System, also known as TrueU, is not an operating system. This is a term with a really specific meaning. It's like pointing at a weed whacker and saying it's a 787 Dreamliner. Building an operating system is a crazy, complicated thing to do, and they just portray it as like a casual thing you can toss off in a night. These cameras that just drop anywhere and they magically send data up to the internet for 2 years. I just got an iPhone 7 a few days ago because my iPhone 6 couldn't hold a battery charge for more than about 6 hours, even if I didn't use it. They've built this technology to have an always-on battery streaming video for 2 years. Why are they in the social media business? Be in the battery business. That's where the money is right now. That's what Tesla's really in. They're not in the car business. They're in the battery business. And it sends data via satellites. So receiving data via satellite is easy, but broadcasting it means hitting a moving target above Earth. So you need like a big satellite dish, vast amounts of power. Again, they're in the wrong business if they figured out how to violate the laws of physics. But he just goes along with it, like, never mind this, let's ignore reality and go ahead with this concept of always on cameras. But these are not things that are going to happen. These are not things we need to concern ourselves with. The idea that there's no mechanism for deleting anything from sea change archives, remember that's an important thing, is there's this thing that has been seen, that how do we delete it? So, oh no, we can't do that. That means that this story takes place in a parallel universe. It doesn't have a movie industry or record industry or libel laws. The reality is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the DMCA, it's this system we've had for 15 years that's created this mechanism by which when anybody's copyright is violated, and realistically it's the record industry that does this, they can send a takedown notice and the offending material is removed. So Facebook, Twitter, whoever might be hosting that stuff. So a world in which this doesn't exist, the reality in which this book takes place is a reality that doesn't have copyright, which is a very strange reality. I don't really get it, but it would have all sorts of implications that I think would have been interesting to be brought up in the book. Almost wrapping up with my laundry list that I have to get out of the way. The Circle's developers created a system to replace our entire election system with a website in one night. So I have built software that contributes and is part of our election system. This is like having 9 women team up to make a baby in 1 month. You can't. They did like, well, they're really smart. No, it doesn't matter. You can't do that. That's not a thing. And so it's really frustrating as somebody who does this professionally to see it misrepresented in a way that I think is less interesting. Like the reality show, the next day, like this really angry group of developers who's like, oh my God, did you know every state has their own system? We don't even have a national election system. There are no national standards, there's no national equipment, there's no national practices. 2 states wouldn't return our calls, but to be fair, it was 3 in the morning. The rest don't know who we are. There's an approval system and a regulatory process we have to get approved for, and it takes a minimum of 8 months. Like, that's how this would actually play out, which would be an interesting plot element. The idea that these apparently all-powerful group is blocked by bureaucracy. But that's an amazing weapon in things like violations of privacy, is bureaucracy serves to slow these things down pretty effectively. And finally, those sex scenes were the worst. They were so horrible. It's like he just opened a thesaurus and would find some sort of body part or verb or adjective and just like pick an unrelated ostensible synonym and just drop it in there. Man, that was some squirm-inducing scenes there. He has children. Dave Eggers has children. He's aware of sex, but you wouldn't know it reading the book. So let me get to my actual main points here instead of my laundry list. So to begin with, like my first main point here is that forced transparency like sea change wouldn't really work. So sea change was this idea in the book, as a refresher for those who might have been for a bit if they read it, is wearing a camera all the time to live stream. It'd be like using Facebook Live with your phone in front of you all the time, so everybody can see who you're talking to, can hear what you're talking about. And they begin by pushing this on politicians and saying, if you really believe in transparency, this is something that you should pursue so that people understand that you're on the up and up. And as a twist, it's implied that the Circle is ginning up charges against elected officials who won't go along. It's not clear if they're like faking evidence that they've done something corrupt or they've actually uncovered something, but it becomes pretty corrupted itself, getting people to use sea change. So Exhibit A of the problem with this idea that you can force politicians to be transparent. Donald Trump's tax returns. Where are they? There's no law requiring him to release them, which is exactly what the Circle addresses. The idea that if enough people really want an elected official, or somebody who wants to be an elected official, to release something, they're going to do it, because to fail to do so would be embarrassing. Donald Trump has been under tremendous pressure to do this for months. He is no closer now to doing that than he was 6 or 8 months ago. If anything, he feels even less pressure to do it, because what's going to happen? What's anybody going to do? What's the downside? The calculus is that the downside of releasing it, whatever's in those, apparently the campaign is judged to be much worse than not releasing it. And that's often the trade-off. And I would say this, I used to work for the Sunlight Foundation, the leading organization in the space of promoting government transparency, is that frequently when we talk about the importance of transparency, it assumes that politicians and elected officials aren't doing wrong. If they are doing something wrong, then to make that known is much worse. So they want to oppose transparency, or more frequently, they say they support it and then do everything that they can to undermine it. A good example of this is campaign finance. If you want to know what a member of or somebody running for U.S. House of Representatives has spent on their campaign, that's all filed electronically. It's easy to look up online. The U.S. Senate has exempted themselves. They track all that electronically. They print it out on paper. They mail it to a processing facility in Kentucky, a federal government one, that scans it all in again, restructures it as data, and then makes it available. The effect of which is that, yeah, they've submitted it on time, they've complied with that requirement for transparency, but until you can actually get data, just a stack of paper, until the public can get that data, that takes a while. Now you better believe the Senate's under a lot of transparency to knock it off. They're taking digital data, making it analog, and making it digital again at tremendous taxpayer expense to run this whole facility to redigitize this stuff. It's transparent, but they don't want to go any farther because otherwise it tips their hand to their opponents. They can get that information even faster. And when you're running for re-election, you don't want your opponents to have that. So a non-trivial amount of congressmen's work could not be live streamed. It would either be illegal to do so or just deeply stupid. So like some congressmen are in meetings frequently about classified topics. You can't stream that. Now there's a whole range of things leading up to top secret. There's a whole range of classifications. I have like some crazy low level of access to security. This so low, I don't even know what it's called. Like I'm that unimportant in government. But there is like some level, so there are things that I do for work that aren't public, that I couldn't talk about. I wouldn't go to jail if I did it, but I'd be fired. So congressmen have access to this whole range of things. And there's a pretty low threshold at which they can't really make that public. And just putting their camera on them isn't enough. If they put the camera on them, they would be arrested. And then they would go to jail, or depending on what they'd done wrong, it might be that the Justice Department would come after them, they'd file a cease and desist. No amount of pressure from the circle would make any difference. There's a law that's being violated, and there are agencies whose job it is to prevent it. So there's also that they meet with constituents about things that shouldn't be public, like victims of crime. Those meetings would stop. Those people would not be represented. It would be harmful to democracy if people couldn't have a private meeting with their congressman about something that they don't want millions of people to know about. Many of us have legitimate concerns that the world shouldn't know about. And the idea that a congressman has bought into that doesn't mean that their constituents would. It would be a cause for them not to be reelected, not to be reelected. But maybe more important is that most of what particularly congressmen spend time on is crazy boring. Absolutely nobody would want to watch it. Every day, members of the U.S. House of Representatives spend more time in a call center fundraising for the re-election than they do actually legislating. It's a terrible system that we have, where they can't fundraise in the Capitol, that's illegal. So they get on their cell phones or take a walk. But also, both parties maintain call centers real close to the Capitol. And so when they have a break and they schedule their breaks around these call times, lunchtime is a prime call. The same reason why y'all can be here at lunchtime is the same reason why lunchtime is when congressmen, they're not going to be having a meeting on the floor of the House at 12 o'clock. They want to be off making phone calls. That's more important to them to get reelected. So they go to one of the call centers run by their party. It looks just like any sort of like boiler room operation. Like I remember seeing in the news a couple weeks ago about this operation in India that was calling millions of Americans saying, we're the IRS, we're going to come arrest you unless you pay us. It was this extortion scheme. So the pictures of this place, it's just like this endless sea of desks and those cubicle walls and so on. That's where like even the most important congressmen go. Like that's where they go at lunchtime. They sit down at this cube farm and there's a phone and a desk and they have a list they're given by their staff and they start calling. They're dialing for dollars. So if getting reelected requires, $2 million in that district, they can break that up by the number of days in that 2-year term, and that's the amount they have to raise every day. So if they're on the hook for $20,000 a day and they don't do it that day, $40,000 the next day. You got to fundraise or you lose. You can't, not only would nobody want to watch this, almost nobody, but you can't live stream that for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is that you're tipping your hand to your opponent, who is not an incumbent. If you're a member of the House of Representatives, somebody who's running against you, your opponent can't see, or your opponent's fundraising isn't public, but you as a congressman have to let everybody know every humiliating phone call that you have to make as a congressman. Because these phone calls, they have notes attached so they can suck up. Even though I don't know this person, like, oh, John, so glad to talk to you. How's your wife, Jenny? And your kid, is he doing well on the cross? And it's because they have a staff that has to maintain these for them. These phone calls are humiliating. But the one thing that makes it okay is at least it's privately humiliating. it's just them and the person they're calling. To make that public, good Lord, that would be bad. One other thing, it would make public donations less than $100, which is not disclosed to the FEC. I don't think it's that it can't be, but it's not. And so that creates a whole new class of people who are unwilling to give to campaigns because they don't want their name or address made public. So another problem with this forced transparency is it brings up the earmark system that we had in government. So the earmark system that was abolished in 2013 was terrible and also important, and it worked like this. If you're a congressman, you would be given a certain amount of money. The leadership would say, all right, Congressman Smith, you have $2 million to hand out this year. Congratulations. And so they get to put what were known as earmarks, the ability to say, all right, I'm going to give $500,000 to Piedmont Virginia Community College and $1.5 million to go through the Department of Transportation to do a study for a new entrance ramp on 64. And so they look like heroes. Yay, you gave us the money. Well, they didn't. U.S. taxpayers gave them the money. But that congressman running for re-election can say, remember what I did for 64? Remember what I did for PVCC? So it's a really important mechanism to keep congressmen in line. Because if they weren't voting the way that their party wanted them to, if they were prohibiting something important from happening in Congress, they're standing in the way of a bill, leadership could say, don't you want your $2 million? If you don't have those goodies to hand out, how are you going to get reelected? So in the name of transparency, in 2013, we moved away from earmarks. Now, that money is all properly on the record. A congressman has to file a budget amendment that says, I, Congressman Smith, want this much money for this thing, and then there's a vote on whether or not that amendment is accepted. Compared to the earmark system, where it was just a list of numbers and there was no public record as to who had requested which money. So the idea was that a congressman could say, I opposed increased funding, increased government spending, and then turn around, maybe even the same speech, and say, and I secured $12 million in funding for this district. Well, these two things are often at odds, but the ability to secure that funding while also decrying government spending turned out to be pretty great for being able to get people reelected. But in the name of transparency, that is now public, and so the result is that those requests aren't made anymore, and they're certainly not handed out on the basis of favoritism. This all sounds better, right? The problem is, by adding this layer of transparency, we've lost a mechanism for the House and Republican and Democratic caucuses to be kept in line. It used to be there was a way to make sure that the budget was going to pass. You would tell your caucus, if you don't vote for this budget, anybody who votes against this, you're not going to be able to get any earmarks. You say, oh, okay, fine, I'll vote for the budget. And so that was a really great tool for the party whips to be able to keep their members in line. That tool's gone. The good news is we have more transparency. The bad news is we can't pass budgets. We can't pass basic bills. Congress has become deeply dysfunctional. The right thing was done, but the outcome was bad. So tying transparency to better government outcomes is satisfying and wrong. I wish it were otherwise. There's also a great argument to be made that smoke-filled backrooms are the only way that Congress gets things done. And Waldo at PVCC in Connie's class would have been horrified to hear Waldo in 2016 say that. But I increasingly think that it's true. So when congressmen are negotiating in the light of day, when their C-SPAN is watching, they're going to stand up and say exactly what they have to say in order to get reelected. Because of hyper-partisan redistricting, we don't have competitive districts. Most districts for U.S. House of Representatives and for state Senate and state delegates are drawn basically by the incumbents. They get to decide what their districts look like. And so districts aren't 50-50 Democrats, Republicans. Districts are 60-40 Democrats, Republicans, because the Democrat wanted a district he could get reelected in. So the general election doesn't matter. You know who's going to win. The important thing is the primary. And so what that means is that candidates have to run to the edges to get renominated. Otherwise, the challenger is going to say, he's not liberal enough. We deserve a liberal representative here. And then the incumbent's going to lose and a more liberal candidate is going to take his place. Because the primary is the only election that matters. So we get this pushing to extremes of candidates. So by making public what candidates do, it requires that they keep the same their persona as candidates campaigning and what they actually do governing. That sounds good. You don't get two-faced representatives, but it's bad in that it keeps cooperation from happening. You can't cooperate. There's no reaching across the aisle. If people can see you reaching across the aisle, and the act of doing so is enough to lose re-election. Transparency seems good, but it often ain't working out. So my second two main points are a little speedier here. The second overall theme here about the book is this idea that tying people's identities to their internet presence will yield better discourse is total fantasy. So just a couple of quotes from the book. Overnight, all comment boards became civil. All posters were held accountable. The trolls who had more or less taken over the internet were driven back into the darkness. So I don't know if any of y'all looked like the Daily Progress's comment sections. So they use Facebook to comment. You have to sign into Facebook. It's your photo, it's your name, and it turns out people are just jackasses, whether or not they put their names on it. So there was a period of about 18 months where a bunch of us who work in this field of identities online and social online management, as I've done a lot of work for years, we had this theory. Maybe the way to make comment boards better, comments generally, was to tie them to people's real identities. So for about 18 months, we got more newspapers to push that out, to improve comments because they were just garbage, to incorporate Facebook as a means of commenting, to do that. And after about 18 months, we realized, oh my God, we were wrong. People are just the worst. We didn't know. We thought that maybe it's when people are anonymous that they're terrible, but it turns out humans are just bad. So, lesson learned. But the unfortunate thing for Eggers is he wrote this book in those 18 months. In the time when we were all like, this is gonna fix everything, that's when he wrote this. And by the time it was published, we were all like, no, that was a terrible idea. What were we thinking? So it was just terrible timing on his part. He thought he was establishing a thesis based on what was going to be truth, and it turned out to be wrong. A lot of us were really convinced. I thought that was going to make everything better. But I mean, you just look at your, old high school classmate who friended you on Facebook for some reason, and the stuff that he has to say about Trump or Clinton. Like, there's some crazy stuff people are writing on Facebook. We are all finding out exactly who our racist uncles are. Their names are on it. They seem to be cool with this. But there's just no relationship at all between these two things. So the final main thing that I want to say is that Eggers fears a future that there's just not really a danger of happening. So just look at Snapchat. Why is Snapchat so popular? Because the things go away. You don't want to build up this permanent history of your communications. The idea that it's ephemeral is important. That's been embraced for a reason. There's also a reason why the olds don't get Snapchat. I have Snapchat, I use it a bit. It's kind of confusing at times. And I am certainly, in terms of my own background, like a total digital native. But Snapchat doesn't make sense, certainly to just about anybody over 40. And to anybody over 30, it confuses us a bit, but we're rolling with it, basically. And it's because we're seeing a generational shift in the understanding of how to own your own identity. I have to say online, but that's online, offline, what's the difference? It's just another way, another place that we're representing ourselves. And in both places, we cultivate a concept of who we are. We present aspects of ourselves in order to control what people think of us and maybe who we really are. So these are important things to do, but the fact that we're all starting doing them, that this change is happening, shows that we're not really on this trajectory to a point where everything's public. As a rule, people say, if this trend continues, absurd thing will happen. As a rule, all trends are bell curves. There's exceptions, but for the most part, people do a lot of things and then they do less of it. That's just what happens. The same thing is going to happen with the erosion of privacy online. I know plenty of people who delete their tweets periodically. They use Twitter plenty, but maybe every 6 months they'll just erase everything and start over again because they don't want that history available. Facebook, Facebook, for instance, I have a 4-year-old. I don't post pictures of my kid on Facebook. I just don't. It's his identity. He'll get to decide eventually how to represent himself. I post a picture of him on Halloween because he had a mask on. But facial recognition has gotten pretty good. I'll let him sort that out as he gets older. I'll get him to decide how to present himself. So there's a long-term shift that's happening. One last point to make about this. This idea of advancing the interests of business against personal privacy is a trade-off. Exhibit A is Google+. We have this incredibly powerful company. Their data tendrils reach into so much of what we do and who we are, and they could never they're still trying to make it a thing. It's never going to be a thing. Stop trying to make Google Plus a thing. They really, really wanted to tie everything we do online to this identity, in part because it helps better to tie us, for the purpose of advertising, for online and offline advertising. It was going to be a really powerful tool for them. didn't happen. If Google can't do it, who can? Who is the circle that we're supposed to be fearing in life now? Like, we just don't see the rise of anything like that. And I think the other reason why we don't need to fear this future is Eggers just hates social media. Like, it scares him because he's old and he doesn't get it. Like, he wasn't raised with this concept. It's not that old people, I'm 38. Like, I am an old by that definition. I know plenty of people who are like under 18 who don't get technology in any way either. But if you were to graph overall the general trends, you would find that the older you get, the more likely to be like, yeah, I don't really know about Facebook. Like my grandparents wouldn't use Facebook or anything like that. And younger, certainly trends higher. So Eggers is definitely on the record on the end of the spectrum is, I don't know what this is. It was invented after I turned 30, and anything that I invented after I turned 30 scares me. And I found that to be true in my life, which is weird. So what he created really was something closer to a funhouse mirror of social media than any sort of a parody or an exaggeration of what's really there. But just to conclude, here's where I agree with Eggers. We can't fix social or political problems with technology. We can't. Efforts to do it fail. I've tried a lot of times. I thought, oh, no, I found an exception to this. This is going to be good. No. Just like the idea of tying people's identities online and offline. That's going to fix the problem of being jerks. No, the problem is that people are jerks, not that their identities aren't connected. You can't fix social and political problems with technology. It doesn't work. I think Eggers is right about that. Those are subservient. Technology is subservient to those things. So instead of trying to fix tech, we have to fix people, and that's a much harder problem. The fact that I have this reluctance about sharing my own son, and I have this is news for you, a second son on the way in January. Ditto there, like we're going to be really restrictive. And the fact that I do that, the fact that I constrain these things, I think helps show that I have to agree with Eggers to an extent. If I didn't fear problems happening from social media, from people being able to manage their identities or not be able to manage them, I wouldn't have this reluctance. So he's clearly onto something fundamentally, and I think in that sense I have to give him credit for tapping into something useful. So, transparency and effective governments are often at odds. Tying people's real identities to their online identities has no effect on discourse, and Dave Eggers' vision of the future is not something we actually have to worry about. I'm relieved to inform you. Now is the part where we discuss. They get anything totally wrong? Anybody want to completely disagree? I'm fine with that. I didn't write the book. Like, I wouldn't be sad. Yeah.
I agree with you about using real identities, how when people post on newspaper websites in the comments section, how they turn out to be just awful. But I do think that on personal blogs, when people comment there anonymously, I don't think they would say those things if they were using their real identity.
So this idea that I'm repeating this also for the benefit of future watchers, as in the spirit of the book, this is being recorded. The idea that yes, people are terrible when their identities are their real ones, but aren't they even worse when they're using anonymous accounts, or at least under pseudonyms? So I thought that too, but newspapers that have attempted to make the switch, The Guardian, the British newspaper, did a really great study on this. They moved to trying authenticated identities, and even some newspapers in Virginia have done the same thing, like Daily Progress as well. But The Guardian compared the trend, looking at words that people use, looking for particularly offensive words, of how that changed over time. They found that it just didn't have an effect, that the comments continued to happen, they happened to other people's names, but they were still terrible. Now maybe it's different terrible people. Maybe my worst self, maybe I'm willing to be nasty anonymously. I hope not. I've always restrained myself from doing so, but maybe. But maybe there are also just enough unpleasant people out there to displace those of us who might be tempted, but are not if our real identities are tied to it. The Guardian also found they tracked negative comments and tied them to the gender of the writer, and found that if you're a woman, particularly a woman of color, don't even read the comments. Just if you write an article, never read the comments, because they're all terrible. White dudes, people get nice things to say to the white dudes. Like articles on the same topic, taking the same viewpoint, it didn't matter. So this is further data that came out of a study from The Guardian that was really useful. So I suspect you're right that individuals might choose to be really nasty where they can be anonymous that wouldn't otherwise be, but there might be just enough terrible people who just don't care about having their identities tied to it that it displaces them. Yeah.
Doesn't the online space just give you that ability to be nasty? Because I can yell at people in the car about their driving that I would never say to their face. Same thing on the online platform. I think you have this ability to be somewhat anonymous, and just be as nasty as you want to be, even though your identity is out there, but you're not. You would never say it to somebody face to face.
You're talking about this disinhibition effect. That's not right either. The effect of being disinhibited. Let's go with that. Of online communications, that you could yell at somebody in your car who wouldn't hear you. Somebody who cuts you off, and whatever, they're not going to hear you, it's fine. And that communicating online extends that. I think that's right, and I think it's part of the difficult societal transition where more and more of our discourse does take place online. There was a book that came out 15 years ago, maybe, Robert Putnam, a professor at Harvard, called Bowling Alone. And it was pre-social media, at least the mass adoption of social media. And he was saying it used to be that people were members of clubs. People would do things together. The number of social contacts they would have per day was high, and he can graph over time based on things like membership in bowling leagues and things like this. It's gone down, down, down. And he was asking, what's going to happen? Like, are we all going to become hermits? Like, how does this end? This trend was a bell curve. That it turned out that what was mostly passively receiving information online was able to move into something bidirectional. So we could communicate with others online and go back to being social if disintermediated a bit. To the internet. But the one catch is because you're not face-to-face with somebody, it's easier to be rude, particularly if it's somebody there's no danger that you're ever going to meet them in person. And in fact, I maybe once a month, I'll see like a friend of a friend write something on Facebook thinking, oh, no, you didn't. And I'm going to step in and say like, whoa, what you said is offensive and wrong, and you should feel bad. And I feel pretty good about myself. Until I go back to Facebook and I see like the notifications thing, and I see like, oh, they responded. I was right, but am I gonna read it? Are we gonna do this? I don't know. Maybe I'm too busy for Facebook now. I'll check back later. That it's easier to say things that either you wouldn't say face to face, or if you did, you'd have body language and tone and manner, and there's an opportunity for mutual understanding. Compared to somebody says something I think is dumb, I tell them why it's dumb, an hour later, 2 hours later, they tell me why I'm a jerk. There's none of that interplay to make that better. So it is possible that in fact this other end of the bell curve from the Bowling Alone thesis is that we're all being more social and we're all being more terrible. That may well be the trend. And if I'm willing to do that on Facebook with the best of intentions, perhaps we can understand why people are willing to do so who don't generally in life have the best of intentions to be really nasty. Yeah.
Right, so it's like, if you look at Facebook, like big social media websites, pages, people don't care when they post a comment because they think it's going to get lost with all these comments. More like a local news Facebook page where people are like more careful when they post something in there because they're afraid like they will see someone in their city or town who they commented something on that any issue or like a comment.
No, I
feel like
that's an interesting
like
idea.
Distance is also like a factor when people are like commenting on social media. Because if I'm commenting on someone who is from California, I don't think I would meet him. Or like there would be a chance where like I would meet him in person.
Yeah.
So that's why people are not like aware of why they're using their actual identity from websites.
So this is the idea that if you're communicating with a group or writing something publicly online, that a major part of that audience is people who you might know, people in your area, you're going to be nicer than if the audience either is all over the place or far away, or so many people are writing you think, nobody's ever going to notice my comment, so it probably doesn't matter. I've been thinking wrongly about this, and you've corrected my thinking on it. My thinking was, if I write something really dumb on a New York Times article, well, my friends are going to see, if I do that through Facebook, my friends are going to see it, because when they look at my Facebook page, they're going to see me being a jerk on the New York Times site, so I probably shouldn't do that. But the reality is that most people don't go to their friends' Facebook pages to see, like, what has she been writing recently? Like, this isn't really a thing that most of us do with our time. So the idea that you can get a, I guess it's the online equivalent of a mob, too. Like, if there's enough people yelling unpleasant things around you, like, you're willing to do it, too. People are really susceptible to that. And there's no reason why that shouldn't be as true online as off. Thank you for that.
So as one of those old people,
Hey, I'm an old, too. It's not a slam.
I don't have Facebook. I don't even know what a Snapchat is. So I read it from a completely different viewpoint, not knowing anything technical about whether or not you can do these things. It's more about the concentration of information, concentration of control of the information, and this threat that poses to democracy and to globally, to the way people act, the way they react, and the consequences of that. I know some of the stuff like fusion centers and just the data that is streaming around out there, and I guess you would know if you have the right applications, you can scoop up and aggregate this stuff. That's how I read it, as more of a, not as something that would literally happen, but the potential of that.
I'm so glad you provided that perspective, because what I had said about it at the outset is that bureaucracy is actually a real obstacle here, and that might actually be an interesting story. What I was thinking of is where this really is happening. If you ever go to, I think Google and Facebook do this, deep in the settings, you can see what it thinks it knows about you demographically. And about once every maybe 12 months, I remember this. And because based on all your interactions online, they infer what's your race, what's your age, what are your hobbies, where do you live? And every time I look at it, I laugh because it's so wrong. They know nothing about me. They have so much opportunity to learn so much about me, and yet it adds up to deeply inaccurate conclusions about me. And it's a good reminder that even though they can aggregate all of that data, it's terrible. But where that's very different is federal government. They say that working in, particularly with data in federal government, not with access to anything like the databases that the NSA we now know to have, that is much scarier. The circle, not about a social media organization, but instead about the federal government. If those walls start getting knocked down, and part of my job is to figure out how systems can share data better. But that's also scary if I were working on the wrong systems, because sharing that data starts to get alarming. So I'm on the board of the ACLU of Virginia, and something that I feel strongly about, the organization feels strongly about, is the problem of putting many different types of data in one place. And a good example of this is automatic license plate readers. You can see this sometimes in the back of police cars. You'll see a couple of cameras mounted on the trunk pointing out. Those have computers in them. Every license plate that they see, they're capturing, reading it to actually get the number off the picture and looking it up. So it's just like when they call a plate over the radio, but it's automated. And the idea is they can find out if there's a criminal that needs catching that's driving by, or somebody whose license has expired, or whatever. So that's okay to a limited extent. As in, if they're just driving around and they get hits like that, and they say, okay, I'm going to pull that guy over, that'll be one thing that's a little creepy, but okay, I can see it. But instead, they hold this data. They keep it for weeks, months, years. And by driving cars around all the time, and they'll also in some places keep stationary devices mounted on the side of highways, they now know every time you've driven by, what time you drove by, which way were you going, when did you come back. You get enough of these and you can track exactly how people move all over the city. Now right now, most governments aren't sophisticated enough to do that, but it's not hard. That's a system I can build given a few months to be able to come up with all those data points and figure out how people move. So I'd be able to say, oh, this person lives somewhere within this half-mile radius. They must work somewhere right around here. Their commuting schedule takes them by this point at this time every day. We see that the car changed, but the license plate is the same. You know, getting this sort of information about people, you can start to draw some alarming conclusions about them that government shouldn't necessarily have. And the implications become scarier if you realize that government gets things wrong. So now you find yourself, I don't know, arrested for murder because you drove by, or a car with a license plate very much like yours, drove by one of those cameras at the wrong time. Just like anybody who's ever gotten a red light ticket, automated red light ticket in the mail that wasn't for you. That happens all the time. because the number was close enough, or it was smudged. Building these sorts of systems is alarming. And thank you for bringing that up, because that is an important message from the book that I glossed over. Yeah.
I actually want to jump back to the whole comments on Facebook thing, if we can, for a second. My favorite thing to do when I'm on Facebook is when I find articles, I will always read the comments. And I've always, I have to. I don't know what it is. I'm fascinated with it. I'm fascinated with the way that people will, when they know that I'm never going to meet this person, I don't live in this city, they will be so mean. And I've noticed with what Wada was saying, that if they are commenting on something that's happening in California or something and they live in New York, that they will be so rude. And then I'll even look at their page and read something that they wrote on a local article, and they are as nice as could be. Their language towards somebody is I disagree with you and this is why, as opposed to, well, you're bleeping wrong. And I find that so
bleeping
fascinating.
here. Thank you for that. Check myself accordingly.
And I find that so fascinating, and I wanted to just point that I see that on an everyday basis, because I do that every day when I have free time, is that I see people who will just sit there and have that, because I'm online and I'm never going to see any of these people, it's okay for me to act like this.
I hope you're studying sociology or psychology.
I wish I was.
Because that sounds really on point for you.
And I also wanted to say, with the fact that you don't post your kids' pictures on Facebook, that's also really safe, because with the whole you can track people's patterns, well, you can do that from Facebook with people who check in, who maybe don't realize that their GPS is on, and every time they post something, it shows where they're posting from. You could accidentally not realize that you just posted where your kid goes to school. And, 2 weeks later when your kid is missing, obviously that's kind of a extreme scenario, but that does happen on a semi-regular basis. That's how stuff like that happens. And so the fact that you keep your kids very private, I just wanted to say also was a really good idea, because more parents should probably do that.
Also, I had 2 stalkers for years. One of them is in jail now. Not prison, of course, but jail, so he's less alive. I couldn't even own my land in my house or my wife's name. Another guy was in Waynesboro. I used to run a gay rights pack called Virginia Family Values, and this really upset him a lot. And he would repeatedly, over the course of 5 years, threaten to kill me. So that made me cautious about what sort of information like that I share. Things like that have a way of maybe honing the importance of privacy for an individual.
So I don't know if I've been sort of pondering things to do this sort of make better people aspect. Just thinking about comment sections and what people do in comment sections. So I read something, and I guess leading up to this election, just how the internet has allowed for these groups to find solidarity and sort of emerge. So maybe these clubs that were sort of fringe and dark have sort of come out of the basement and have been brought to life. And I wonder about this too, just from a psychological aspect. I mean, I feel exhausted by all of the stuff that's coming in.
I don't even know what I'll do with my time as of next Wednesday.
Right. I mean, but just in general, and we read these comment sections, or sometimes when I read them, and I'm just like, people are terrible. These are terrible. These are horrible. Why do we communicate like this? But then there's nothing for me to do with that, other than to just feel that. And then, so I don't know if you've read any space, how is that affecting, ingesting all of this ick? And then, what do you do with that? If you're not commenting and not participating, and I just wonder collectively what kind of toll that is taking on us, or how that is playing out.
The question is, how is it affecting us to be reading such unpleasant things? What is it doing to us, and what do you do about it? So a friend of mine runs a podcast called Says Who that he started just a month ago. It's just running up to the election, and it's a coping mechanism is how they say. It's not a podcast, it's a coping mechanism is their slogan, and it's once a week, and it's just about all right, so it's going to be fine. Let's talk about self-care. They interview people reporters who are on the campaign trail and ask them what are you doing to keep from losing your mind? What are you doing about horrible people? How are you maintaining your sanity? And they provide tips about, like, maybe don't use social media after 9 o'clock. Don't even look at comments like ever in life. Take time to relax. Remember, things are happening other than the presidential election. That we are collectively beginning this conversation about self-care, and that maybe, like in my case, I turned off about a year ago all Facebook notifications. I don't want to know. If I get a Facebook message, I don't care. I want to know when I decide I want to check on Facebook. But if somebody replies to a comment that I had, the time for me to know about that is not the time that they made that reply. It's just not a healthy way to live. I use a plugin on my browser on Chrome that blocks all comment sections. I don't want to see them. I don't. Well, that's the problem. I do want to see them. I mustn't. It's very bad for me. It's a waste of time, and it's infuriating. And there's a guy named Randy Monroe who has a comic called XKCD, which is wonderful. He's a local guy from Chesterfield. And one of his comics is wife telling presumably her husband. They're stick figures, so I'm projecting my own biases on these stick figures. But a wife calling to her husband, like, honey, why are you still up? It's time for bed. And he says, I can't. Somebody's wrong on the internet. And this is the somebody's wrong on the internet effect. That the feeling that if I can just tell this one person that they're horrible, maybe they'll stop being horrible. And then maybe everybody else will stop being. This is going to be what fixes things. No, they're just bad. And you as an individual can't fix. Maybe they don't even need to be fixed. Maybe like we're the horrible ones. So let's not be too prescriptivist, but can't fix that person and why they're angry or sad or scared or whatever. You can, in addition to self-care, it's the people around you. Like I reached out to my cousin and a couple of old friends who I've seen expressing some really unpleasant opinions around the presidential election. Not what their beliefs are, but how they're expressing them. It's like terrible and harmful and not good for other people to be reading. Them I can help. Them I can have a conversation with. Don't read the comments, turn off notifications, and in my case, I also use a heavy user of Twitter, both professionally and personally. I use a service called Block Together on Twitter, where any of my friends, anybody who they block, I also have blocked automatically, and I can subscribe to other block lists. And so, like anybody who's just a Twitter egg, is the term we use, anybody who has a Twitter account who has never even bothered to set a profile photo is probably just a troll. Like, I don't see them. Anybody who is just a habit of just saying terrible things, somebody I know has probably blocked them. I don't have to see what they're writing. But there's a danger to this too, of saying, well, I don't want to see people who disagree with me. I don't want to be aware of opinions that I dislike or expressed in ways that I dislike. So there's a balancing act, but we're way too far on the people are horrible end of the spectrum right now. I look forward to overcorrecting where we all think like everybody is nice, and then we can maybe correct back a bit.
I like to read, well, when I'm reading a lot of articles, I try to go to the comments. I particularly peruse the Washington Post, and I was like, wow, I'm really fear for the country. I didn't think people were crazy out there, and it's a lot of them. And, nothing special about being on the Washington Post, getting a higher level of intelligence or discourse there. And then I read an article, again, it was a Post, where researchers studying the trolls and saying that they it's not so much their ideological or political views, they just like making you mad, and they're antisocial, and this is their vehicle, and they're just out there, and then you see it a little, it pops out at me a little bit more when I look at all the trails. I just ignore them. I just don't feel bad. They're just trying to get you good. And
that's why we established this word, troll. It was from the idea, I think the early 90s, I guess, the idea of fishing, where you just put some bait on the line and catch it off the end of the boat and just go trolling and see who's going to bite. So it's like something fun to do, like to show up on a discussion board about Dave Matthews Band and be like, who's better, John Mayer? Like, they're not trying to change anybody's mind. They just think this is hilarious to get a rise out of 100 people. And they don't care if that's under their identity or not. Their friends think that's hilarious. Rightly so. Like, that is pretty funny. So the idea that making their identity known would stop trolling, I think fails to get why people do it. Trolling, again, being say something you don't believe or not believe in. It doesn't matter. You're just trying to get a rise out of people. And recognizing that, I think, is another good form of self-care as well, so you don't spend too much time frustrated at people who don't really believe the thing you think they believe.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you said that you look at the comment section. I had never looked at comment section being an African American woman.
I was wondering.
It's never done. My sister-in-law is white, and she trolls. Like she will just go on websites and look for people who said horrible things, and then she will just spend hours like telling them why they're wrong.
And some of them don't know when to stop.
And neither does she. But the other thing is, I thought it was interesting in the book when they were talking about like trying to get everyone to vote and like getting everyone registered. I'm not big on Facebook. I don't post any pictures of my kids. I'm only 30, but I feel the same way you do. But then all of a sudden, like Facebook started popping up, like, "Hey, are you registered? Register through Facebook." And I thought that was kind of creepy a little bit. I think it's a great thing to get people registered, but Facebook, I feel like we should have someone that's.
So for the idea that Facebook asking people, are you registered to vote, that's actually something that the team that I work with put together, is to get those requests asked, are you registered to vote? It asks everybody, but it's not like picking and choosing certain people, and it would send people to a site that my organization built. There was no central website to register to vote in the country until just a few months ago. You would have to go to your state's website, maybe you could register online, maybe you couldn't. There was not even a place to find links to all of those sites. So this created a central site where you could figure out how to do that. But yes, when you start to intermingle something as personal, and voting, historically voting was very public. Like you would go to your precinct and you had to shout out who you were voting for so everybody could hear. And the idea of ballot privacy just started emerging about a century ago. And really in the past 50 years it's become important, particularly with the rise of the fall of Jim Crow and the re-rise of the black vote after Jim Crow appeared. The idea that people should be able to keep their votes secret for their own safety and well-being. And so to have that, we now hold important to have your vote be private. To see Facebook, where maybe it's a pretty closely curated version of your identity. You don't put much about yourself out there. To have it ask you to register to vote can feel like, whoa, these two things aren't supposed to connect. This is weird. But yeah, I sympathize.
Another thing is I'm an elected official, so when you go to your polls to vote, I'm the person who checks you in.
Thank you for doing that.
I can see like the difference in generations where some people, especially older people, like they don't care, they just want to vote. They don't care if you vote for them, they'll just tell you. We recently moved from electronic voting to paper ballots, and people were like, just push the thing for me. And then you have like a lot of like middle-aged people where they are like super private. Like they don't want you to do anything, stand as far away from them. And then young people are like, I don't care.
I vote on Facebook. I vote on Seed Change or whatever it's called.
Yeah. So I think it is kind of interesting to see the turnaround.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say, I think I'm actually the opposite. I actually like reading the comments. And I guess I look at it from a sociological perspective. I look at it as a way of, I'll look at the title of the article and then I'll look at who's in the article. If the title is similar with different people in the article, after reading comments so long, I've kind of come to a generalization of who's going to comment and how they're going to comment. So for me, I look at it as a way of, it kind of gives a bigger magnification of like as a nation, how people think about certain topics, and depending on who the characters are in that topic, we kind of, I don't think you know, but there are certain generalizations that people have about certain areas and certain issues. So I like to read it because it gives me sort of a global idea of like, well, what's the pulse of the country in terms of certain issues, how do certain groups feel about certain things, how do we as a whole maybe feel about certain things, and if there's discourse there, like, are we actually having this discourse? So I kind of look at it. I like comments.
So just a warning about using comment sections to take a pulse of a community or of a nation is increasing pretty substantial evidence at this point that Russia, for whatever reason, has thought it would be fun to screw with the U.S. They have a building, I forget what they call the operation, the building with hundreds of people who work there, whose job is to go to Russian, Chechnyan, Ukrainian, we've got a few different big countries and people and the US websites and post the things they're told to post. It's usually not verbatim. They have to come up with the exact words of their own, but they're told, like, here's the thing you have to push today. And then they have bots to magnify it. So if a comment is written once by one person, then software can take that and repost it to a few other websites and a few other news articles, providing the appearance of 1,000 Americans with strong opinions, but in fact there's 2. And the rest are manufactured by Putin, I guess, who wants to screw with the US, and I can't, that's kind of his thing. I guess we can't be shocked by this. And the things that they choose to pile on are weird, but I used to be funded by a journalism organization in my work, and I went to a lot of their conferences and got to a lot of those people. And so they see, the deluge of traffic, that's weird, this article is only getting comments from people in Russia. That seems, all at the same time, that seems notable. But as a reader of the comments, there's no way for you to see where those come from. So, but on the other hand, reading, comments on NBC 29's website, God help you, those are the worst. But that is unfortunately a better way to get a pulse of the public. So, yes, ma'am, so many people haven't asked.
Just kind of going back to what you were saying about technology cannot fix social and political issues. I think it's the method in which the social media is trying to fix those issues, which is primarily negative. So, for example, just using the presidential candidates, like Hillary has her commercials degrading Donald Trump. Donald Trump says horrible things about Hillary, and it's just a negative on top of a negative. So as opposed to solving the problem with, this is why I think I'm right, because I don't agree with this person, they're wrong, they'll never be right, and I think it's the method in which they're trying to fix the social and political issues.
Yeah, so the comment here, just for the record, is that trying to fix these non-technical problems, particularly if you're using technology, is particularly misapplied right now in the midst of a presidential election, which is about more negative things when perhaps you might want to start with something positive. Did I capture that?
Yeah, and in general too, when people comment, it's more, you get if you're opposing, the first instinct is more rage than okay, let me think about what they're saying. It's no, they're wrong, that's not what I think. And it's take a second to think about, really, is that how you want to handle it?
Pretty routinely, I will read a comment that I'm, in a discussion I'm having, that I'm oh, whoa, what? You said what? And I'll think, okay, just don't reply now. Just wait 30 minutes. And then 5 minutes later, I'm I replied? I wasn't gonna, I was gonna cool off first, but I didn't even remember doing that. That it's easy to rage reply, and it is not at all healthy. One more question, you sorry, you got your hand up.
It's kind of on those same lines, maybe a comment about reactionary training, students talking about education, where early on people would use Wikipedia and professors are whoa, hold on. And early on in Twitter, there wasn't really a lot of training per se, and you can pick out certain presidential candidates and you can look at their tweets from a long time ago and you're whoa, hold on. And so I think something that may be interesting to look at is the training that's going on in education, where companies like Blackboard took the comment section and applied it to education, where you make a post and then you reply, and it's your professors are pushing you to make it academically rigorous, and so it's kind of training you to think logically through the things that you're commenting and things like that. I'm just wondering if you could comment on how maybe that kind of logical training is going to have an effect in future parts, especially talking about future elections, where we now know that Twitter is all fair game and they're going to dig through so many tweets.
We had a question and just an open question for a few years, which is, what will happen when the generation that has been using Twitter for years, and Facebook and publicly for years, and blogging and so on, has this deep online record of the beliefs going back to when they're 12? What happens when somebody like that runs for the presidency? What's fair game? What will harm them? And certainly, we've learned from Donald Trump that apparently you can write anything you want for years, and nothing really happens. So I don't know if this will actually be illustrative of other candidates. We're going to see more and more of that. But taking things like the system that we use for, and there's nothing inevitable about the system that we use for comments. The idea that you provide like your name and email address, or that you sign in through Facebook, or that the comment box is a particular size, or particular information in it, there's nothing preordained about that. We made a lot of decisions to have that system. The idea that we would take that system and apply it to education, we would base Blackboard on that. Like as I was telling you, we had this 18-month experiment with like, maybe we tie identities to comments. Like nobody quite knows how comment systems should work or what they should look like. We're all just doing our best. But at one point, the way we did it was captured and brought into like, all right, this is how Blackboard's gonna do it. This is the system that we're gonna use. It will take them forever to move to something more modern as we evolve this. So we're taking these bad systems that we've built to capture or magnify unfortunate human behavior, and we're using them to like run our education system. God help us like with an approach like the circle of, okay, now let's use that as our voting system. How does that affect people's votes if you're just finished rage reading something on the same screen where 10 seconds later you're casting a vote? So we're intermingling systems that we shouldn't be at times when it's premature to do so. And I guess that's another aspect of the circle that I guess captured things pretty well. Y'all have classes to go to, so I want to begin or end 45 seconds late, but not bad. Thank you all for coming for extra credit or otherwise.